The brutal blow that fells a pregnant wife in the middle of a church service explodes like a public indictment. The mask of a powerful man finally falls. At the hospital, long-buried secrets begin to emerge, bringing a long-lost mother, a courageous nurse, and an investigation no one can stop. If you like stories like this, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel, and leave a comment telling us where you're listening from. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the high windows of the chapel of Our Lady of Grace, casting golden reflections on the polished marble floor. The sound of the organ echoed off the white walls, filling the space with a solemn melody that seemed to float among the crowded pews. Sarah Johnson adjusted her navy blue dress, feeling the fabric tighten slightly over her 6-month belly. Beside her, Ethan Hayes smiled at the guests, greeting business leaders, politicians, and prominent figures of New York society with that rehearsed charm that was so characteristic of him. The New Hope Foundation was celebrating its 10th anniversary that October Saturday, and Ethan had insisted on a grand celebration. Sarah watched it all with a mixture of pride and unease. She knew her husband's smile well, the way he shook hands with calculated force, how he tilted his head just so to feign interest. Everything about him was meticulously planned, including this church service, which was meant not only to mark a decade of social work, but to solidify Ethan's image as a man of integrity, committed to the community's well-being. Father Michael began to speak about charity and purpose, his deep voice reverberating through the room. Sarah tried to focus on his words, but her mind wandered. In recent months, something had changed in Ethan. The late-night meetings multiplied. The whispered phone calls behind closed doors became constant, and the sparkle in his eyes that had once made her fall in love now seemed to hide shadows she couldn't decipher. That's when Sarah saw the woman. She was sitting in the 5th row, on the left, wearing a dark green dress that contrasted with her brown hair, which was pulled back in an elegant bun. The woman was staring intently at Ethan with an expression Sarah couldn't immediately interpret. There was something there, a disturbing intensity that made her heart race. Without thinking, Sarah touched Ethan's arm and whispered his name, discreetly indicating the woman's direction. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Ethan followed Sarah's gaze, and his face, always so controlled, transformed completely. The smile vanished, replaced by a look of fury she had never seen before. His jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists, and for a terrifying moment, Sarah didn't recognize the man beside her. Before she could process what was happening, Ethan stood up abruptly, making the pew creak. Father Michael paused mid-sentence, and every head turned toward them. Sarah felt the weight of hundreds of eyes, the sudden silence deafening. Ethan started, walking toward the woman in green, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. Sarah stood up too, following him on instinct, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it would leap from her chest. The woman remained seated, watching Ethan approach with unnerving calm. When he reached her row, he stopped and said something Sarah couldn't hear. The woman replied, her voice low but firm. It was then that Sarah noticed she was holding a white envelope. Ethan tried to snatch it from her, but the woman dodged with agility, standing up and taking a step back. Sarah, finally, reached them, placing a hand on Ethan's arm. She could feel the tension in his muscles as if he were about to explode. "Please, Ethan, let's just get out of here," she whispered, trying to pull him back. But he shook her off with such force that Sarah lost her balance for a second. "You shouldn't be here," Ethan's voice came through gritted teeth, directed at the woman in green. She lifted her chin, holding the envelope against her chest. "I have every right to be wherever I want, Ethan, and you know damn well why." A murmur began to spread through the chapel. People shifted in their pews, craning their necks to get a better view of the scene. Sarah felt a blush creep up her face, shame and confusion mingling in her chest. Who was this woman? What did she want? And why did Ethan seem so desperate to silence her? That's when the woman looked directly at Sarah for the first time. Her eyes were a deep brown, and in them was a mix of compassion and determination that left Sarah even more bewildered. "I'm so sorry," she said, and her voice carried a weight of truth that sent a chill down Sarah's spine. "You deserve to know the truth about the man you married. Before Sarah could respond, Ethan stepped forward, blocking her view of the woman. "Shut up," he said, a clear threat in his voice. "You don't know anything. You have no proof of anything." The woman laughed, a humorless sound. "No proof? Ethan, I have everything right here." She brandished the envelope. "Documents, emails, financial records. Everything that shows exactly who you are and what you've done with the foundation's money. With the money from the people who trusted you." The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah could hear her own heart, each beat hammering in her ears. Foundation. Money. Her mind spun, trying to make connections she didn't want to make. Ethan had dedicated the last 10 years to the New Hope Foundation, building social programs, raising donations from business leaders and politicians, creating a solid reputation as a philanthropist. It couldn't be true. It just couldn't. "Ethan, what is she talking about?" Sarah's voice came out weak, almost a whisper. He didn't turn to her, keeping his eyes fixed on the woman. "It's a lie," he said. "She's lying. She's a disgruntled employee who was fired for incompetence, and now she wants revenge." The woman shook her head slowly. "Employee? Ethan, I was your partner. We built this foundation together. Or have you forgotten? Before you erased me from every record, before you forged my signature on partnership dissolution papers, before you threatened me into silence." Sarah felt her legs grow weak. She steadied herself on the back of the nearest pew, breathing deeply to fight back the rising nausea. The baby moved inside her, a flutter that normally filled her with joy but now only deepened her despair. How had she not seen it? How had she been so blind? "You need to leave now," Ethan said, his voice rising. "This is private property and you weren't invited. I'm calling security." The woman took a step toward Sarah, extending the envelope. "Before he destroys everything, before he manipulates the situation one more time, I want you to know the truth. Your name is Sarah, isn't it? I know a lot about you. Ethan used to talk about you all the time in the early years, before things went south." Sarah looked at the envelope, then at Ethan, who was now visibly trembling with rage. "Don't take it," he said. "Sarah, trust me. She's trying to destroy us, destroy everything we've built." But Sarah reached out her hand, and the woman placed the envelope in her palm. For a moment, their fingers touched, and Sarah felt the firmness in that grip, as if the woman were trying to transfer courage through that brief contact. That's when Ethan exploded. With a swift, violent motion, he slapped the envelope, sending it flying from Sarah's hand and onto the floor. Papers scattered across the marble, white sheets covered in numbers and text that Sarah couldn't read before Ethan started stomping on them, trying to destroy them. A few people stood up, a hubbub of voices rising through the chapel. Father Michael came down from the altar, his hands outstretched in a placating gesture. "My children, please, let's remain calm. This is a sacred place." But nothing the priest said seemed to reach Ethan. He bent down, gathering the crumpled papers with frantic movements. The woman in green tried to grab them too, and the two engaged in a sort of silent struggle, pulling the sheets from each other. It was in that moment that Sarah saw it. In the corner of one of the papers that had fallen farther away, there was a printed photo. It was Ethan, in an elegant restaurant, sitting at a table with a man Sarah vaguely recognized from the news, a businessman embroiled in corruption scandals years ago. Sarah picked up the photo with trembling hands. She looked at it, then at Ethan, who had stopped gathering papers when he realized what she was holding. The expression on his face changed again, this time to something that looked like pure panic. "Sarah, I can explain," he began, rising slowly. "It's not what it looks like. That lunch was a business meeting, completely legitimate. I was trying to secure a donation for the foundation." But his voice didn't sound convincing, not even to himself. Sarah looked around, seeing all the faces turned toward them. The elite of New York City, people who had donated millions to the foundation, who trusted Ethan, who saw him as an example. And now they were seeing this. They were seeing the mask fall. "You lied to me," Sarah said, her voice stronger than she expected. "For how long, Ethan? How long have you been deceiving me?" Ethan took a step toward her, his hands outstretched. No, it wasn't like that. You don't understand. It's complicated. The business world is complicated. Sometimes you have to do certain things, meet with certain people to get what you need. But everything I did was for the foundation, for you, for us. Sarah felt tears burn her eyes but refused to let them fall. Not there, not in front of everyone. She looked at the woman in green who was watching the scene with a sad expression. "Who are you?" Sarah asked. "My name is Julia Miller." The woman answered softly. "I helped Ethan found the New Hope Foundation 11 years ago. We were friends. We worked together at another non-profit before this. When we decided to create our own foundation, I put in all my savings, my contacts, my reputation. And then 5 years ago, everything changed. Ethan started doing business with the wrong people, embezzling funds, using donation money for personal investments. When I confronted him, when I threatened to expose everything, he pushed me out. He used expensive lawyers, forged documents saying I had voluntarily resigned from the partnership, spread rumors about me in the philanthropic community. He destroyed me professionally." Julia's words fell on Sarah like stones. Each revelation was a blow, each detail a new cut. She looked at Ethan, expecting to see denial, anger, anything that would contradict what Julia was saying. But what she saw in his eyes was worse. She saw calculation. She saw him assessing the situation, thinking about how to get out of it, how to turn the tables in his favor. And in that moment, Sarah realized, it wasn't the first time he'd had that look. She'd seen it before in smaller arguments, in situations where he needed to manipulate a narrative. Like when he explained why he'd sold her grandmother's apartment without consulting her first, saying it was for their own good, to invest in something better. Like when he said she was being paranoid for questioning why he changed the subject every time she asked about their household finances. Like when he convinced her she was imagining things when she suspected he'd lied about where he'd spent an entire weekend. It all started to make sense in a horrible, devastating way. The 3 years of marriage, the promises, the plans for the future, the baby. On the way, all built on a foundation of lies. Ethan finally moved, but not towards Sarah. He turned to the guests, who were watching everything with expressions ranging from shock to morbid curiosity. His voice, when he spoke, had regained some of that performative confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this regrettable interruption. As you can see, we are dealing with a delicate situation involving a resentful ex-employee who is making baseless accusations. I assure you all that the New Hope Foundation is completely transparent, and all our accounts are regularly audited. This woman will be sued for defamation and trespassing." But his performance was cut short by an unexpected sound, a laugh. Julia was laughing, a bitter, sad sound. "Sued? Ethan, do you really think you can still control this?" She turned to the guests. "I have copies of everything. I've sent them to journalists, to the district attorney's office, to regulatory agencies. Today isn't just about confronting you. Today is about making sure the truth finally comes out." The murmur grew louder. People started to get up, some heading for the exit, others pulling out their phones. Sarah could see discreet flashes, knew they were recording, taking pictures that this moment would be news. The scandal Ethan had so feared was materializing right before his eyes. "Sarah, we need to go," Ethan said suddenly, grabbing her arm forcefully. "Now, let's go home and we'll sort this out in private." But Sarah pulled away from him. "No," she said, "I'm not going anywhere with you, not now. I need to think. I need to understand what's happening." Ethan's expression hardened. "You're my wife," he said, his voice low but laced with a veiled threat. "You're carrying my child. You're coming with me now." Something inside Sarah broke in that moment. Maybe it was the possessive way he spoke, as if she were property. Maybe it was all the little things she had ignored over the years, the signs of control she had justified as protection, as love. Or maybe it was simply the cumulative weight of all the lies crashing down on her at once. "No," she repeated, firmer this time. "I am not your property, Ethan, and neither is this baby." It was as if she had lit a fuse. Ethan's mask fell away completely, and what emerged was something that made Sarah instinctively take a step back. His eyes were wild, his face contorted into an expression of rage she had never imagined possible. "You don't know what you're doing," he said, advancing on her. "You're embarrassing me in front of everyone, destroying everything I've built. Because of this lying witch." Julia moved quickly, placing herself between Ethan and Sarah. "Leave her alone," she said. "Your fight is with me, not her." But Ethan wasn't listening to anyone anymore. All the anger, all the frustration of watching his carefully constructed world crumble, all the humiliation of being publicly exposed, it all converged in a moment of blind fury. He shoved Julia hard, sending her stumbling to the side. And then, before anyone could react, before Sarah could process what was about to happen, he raised his hand and struck. The sound echoed through the chapel, loud and shocking in its raw brutality. Sarah felt the pain explode across her face, felt her body lose its balance, felt the world spin. There were screams, voices rising in horror and surprise, hands reaching for her. But it all seemed distant, as if happening underwater. When Sarah finally fell, it was the cold marble that met her, hard and unforgiving. The pain spread through her body, sharp in some places, dull in others. She tried to protect herself, to wrap her arms around the baby, but everything was a blur. Her body wasn't responding properly. The last thing she saw before the darkness began to close in was Ethan's face above her, the realization of what he had done slowly seeping into his features. And then nothing. The rhythmic beeping of monitors was the first thing Sarah could process. A steady, methodical sound that seemed to anchor her consciousness back to reality. Slowly other sounds joined in, muffled. Voices talking outside, the shuffle of shoes in the hallway, the rustle of fabric. Everything seemed wrapped in a thick fog, as if she were trying to surface from deep water. When she finally managed to open her eyes, the white light of the hospital ceiling made her blink repeatedly. Pain throbbed on her face, each pulse synchronized with her heartbeat. She tried to move her head, and a sharp pang made her groan softly. Immediately, a figure approached, a nurse with black hair pulled into a high ponytail. "Easy, honey," the nurse said gently, placing a kind hand on Sarah's shoulder. "You're at St. Luke's Hospital. You took a fall and hit your head. Don't move too much just yet, okay? The doctor will be in to talk to you soon." A fall. The word sounded strange, inadequate. Sarah closed her eyes again, trying to piece together the memories that came in disjointed flashes. The chapel, the navy blue dress, Julia Miller, the envelope with papers scattered on the floor, and then Ethan, his face twisted with rage, the raised hand, the impact. "My baby," Sarah whispered, her hand moving instinctively to her belly. "Is the baby okay?" The back nurse smiled, a warm smile that brought a slight relief to Sarah's tight chest. "The baby is fine, the heartbeat is normal, and all the tests indicate he's healthy. You were lucky." Lucky. Another word that didn't seem to fit. Sarah looked at the nurse, really seeing her for the first time. She looked to be in her 40s with soft lines around her eyes that suggested someone who smiled often. Her name tag read, Beatrice Davis, RN. "How long was I out?" Sarah asked, her voice still hoarse. "About 3 hours," Beatrice replied, adjusting the IV drip hanging beside the bed. "You've been at the hospital since 5 this afternoon. It's 8:15 now." 3 hours. Sarah tried to process it, but her mind was still foggy. "How long have you been here?" she asked, not quite sure why the question mattered. "Since you arrived," Beatrice said. "I was on duty when the ambulance brought you in. There was a lot of commotion, a lot of people wanting information. I had to have security control access." People. Sarah's stomach sank. Ethan. Was he here? Beatrice hesitated for a fraction of a second, but Sarah caught it. "He's in the waiting room," the nurse finally said, "along with a few other people. But you don't have to see anyone right now if you don't want to. You have every right to your space." There was something in the way Beatrice spoke, a deliberate kindness that made Sarah suspect she knew more than she was letting on. "Did you see what happened?" Sarah asked directly. "Did someone tell you?" Beatrice pulled a chair over and sat beside the bed, a gesture that felt surprisingly intimate from someone she had just met. "Sarah, I've worked in the ER for 15 years. I know how to recognize certain patterns. And when a pregnant woman comes in with facial injuries and a confusing story about a fall, my instincts kick in. Sarah felt tears well up in her eyes. "It wasn't a fall," she admitted in a whisper. "He hit me, in front of everyone, in the chapel." Beatrice just nodded as if she already knew. "I imagine that wasn't easy to say out loud," she said. "And I want you to know that you're not alone, okay? We have protocols here at the hospital for situations like this. There are people who can help you, protect you." Sarah wiped the tears with the back of her hand, feeling the rough texture of the bandages on her face. "I don't know what to do. I don't even know where to start." "How about we start with you telling me what happened?" Beatrice suggested gently. "In your own time, no pressure." And Sarah told her. It all came out in a torrent of words. The ceremony, Julia, the accusations, the scattered papers, Ethan's fury. Beatrice listened in silence, just nodding occasionally, her presence comforting and non-judgmental. When Sarah finished, she felt strangely lighter, as if sharing the weight of that terrible truth made it more bearable. "You were very brave not to leave with him," Beatrice said when Sarah was done. "A lot of women, especially when they're pregnant, feel like they don't have a choice. But you chose to stay. You chose to protect yourself." "I don't know if it was courage," Sarah said. "I think it was just instinct, or fear. When I saw that look on his face, I just knew I couldn't go." "Instinct is a form of courage," Beatrice said. "And about that woman, Julia, is she still here?" Sarah didn't know. "I don't even know if she's okay. Ethan pushed her too." Beatrice stood up. "Let me check. In the meantime, Dr. Carter should be in to examine you. He's good, trustworthy. He'll explain all your test results and what you need to do from here." When Beatrice left, Sarah was alone with her thoughts for the first time since waking up. The room was small but clean, with pale beige walls and a window overlooking the hospital parking lot. She could see the lights of cars passing below, people coming and going, living their normal lives while hers had completely shattered. Her mind went back over the last 3 years. Were there signs? There must have been signs. But she had been so swept up in Ethan's charm, in the way he made her feel special, protected. When they met at a charity event, he had seemed perfect, successful, dedicated to social causes, attentive. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of romantic dinners, thoughtful gifts, conversations that lasted until dawn. He made her laugh, made her feel like she had finally found someone who understood her. The proposal came quickly, just 6 months after they met. Sarah had hesitated, thinking it was too soon, but Ethan had been so convincing. "Why wait when we know this is what we want?" he had said, kneeling on the deck of a chartered yacht, the diamond ring sparkling under the stars. "Life's too short to waste time." And she had said yes, of course she had. Who would say no? Her parents adored Ethan. Her friends envied her. Everyone said she had found an incredible man. But now, looking back, Sarah wondered how much of it was real and how much was a performance. The door opened again, but it wasn't Beatrice. It was a tall man with glasses and a white coat, carrying a clipboard. Dr. Henry Carter, according to his name tag. "Good evening, Sarah," he said, pulling up the chair Beatrice had used. His voice was calm, professional. "How are you feeling?" "Sore," Sarah admitted. "Confused, scared." Dr. Carter nodded. "Understandable, given the circumstances. I'm going to explain your medical situation, and then we can talk about the next steps, okay?" He opened the clipboard and began to detail the test results. Sarah had suffered blunt force trauma to the left side of her face, resulting in a significant bruise and a shallow cut that needed 3 stitches. She had hit her head when she fell, but the CT scan showed no signs of bleeding or serious brain injury. There were bruises on her hip and right arm, likely from the impact with the floor, and the baby miraculously seemed completely unharmed. "You're going to need to rest," the doctor continued. "No physical exertion for at least a week. We'll monitor you and the baby closely for the next 24 hours. If everything remains stable, you can be discharged tomorrow afternoon." "And then what?" Sarah asked. "What do I do then?" Dr. Carter took off his glasses and cleaned them slowly. a gesture that seemed to give him time to choose his words. "Sarah, I have to ask, do you feel safe going back home, to the environment you were living in before?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Sarah thought of the Upper East Side apartment she shared with Ethan, the wide windows overlooking the park, the expensive furniture, the nursery they had just started decorating together. It all seemed tainted now, contaminated by what had happened, by what she had discovered. "No," she finally said, "I don't feel safe." "Then we'll work with the hospital's social services to find alternatives," the doctor said. "There are shelters, support programs, resources available. You don't have to go through this alone." But Sarah was barely listening. Her mind had gone somewhere else, to a memory she'd been trying to grasp since she woke up. Something about the chapel, about the moments before Ethan hit her. "There was a woman," she said suddenly. "A woman with silver hair. She was there, I think. Or did I imagine it?" Dr. Carter frowned. "There were a lot of people at the scene when the ambulance arrived. Nurse Davis might know more. She was present for the entire admission process." As if summoned by her name, Beatrice re-entered the room. This time she wasn't alone. Behind her was a woman Sarah didn't immediately recognize. She was older, maybe in her late 60s or early 70s, with wavy silver hair that fell to her shoulders. She wore jeans and a white linen blouse, simple but dignified clothes. But it was her eyes that captured Sarah. They were brown, almost identical to her own, with the same almond shape. "Sarah, Doctor," Carter said, standing up. "I'll let you two talk. If you need anything, just call me." He left, closing the door softly behind him. Beatrice approached the bed, the silver-haired woman remaining near the door, as if unsure she should be there. "Sarah," Beatrice began gently, "this lady arrived shortly after you did. She says she's your mother." The world seemed to stop. Sarah looked at the woman, really looked, searching for any sign of familiarity, any spark of recognition. But there was nothing. Her mother was dead. That's what she had been told her whole life. Her father had raised her alone after her mother abandoned them when Sarah was just 2. It was a story she knew by heart, one she had accepted, one that had shaped so much of her understanding of herself. "That's not possible," Sarah said, her voice louder than she intended. "My mother is dead. She wasn't part of my life." The woman took a step forward, and Sarah could see tears glistening in her eyes. "I know that's what you were told, sweetheart," she said, her voice soft, laden with emotion. "But I'm alive. I've always been alive. And I never, ever abandoned you." Sarah felt her heart race, the monitor beside the bed starting to beat faster. Beatrice placed a hand on her shoulder. "Easy. Take a deep breath. You don't have to deal with this right now if you don't want to." But Sarah couldn't tear her eyes away from the woman. "Who are you?" she asked. "Why are you saying these things?" The woman came closer, stopping at the foot of the bed. "My name is Helen Johnson. I was married to your father, Mark Johnson, for 7 years. When you were 3, we separated, not because I wanted to leave you, but because he took you from me." "That doesn't make sense," Sarah said, shaking her head, the movement making her headache worse. "My dad told me you left, that you chose your career, your freedom, over staying with me." Helen wiped away the tears streaming down her face. "I know that's what he said, and for all these years I've tried to reach you, tried to explain, but he stopped me. He used lawyers, used his influence. He forged my signature on documents saying I was giving up custody, that I was relinquishing my parental rights. When I tried to fight, he threatened me. He said if I didn't disappear from your life, he would make sure I never found work again, that my reputation would be destroyed." The words echoed disturbingly with what Julia had said about Ethan. Forged documents, threats, manipulation of the legal system. Was it possible? Could her own father have done something like that? "I don't believe you," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. "You show up here, at the worst moment of my life, claiming to be my mother. How do I know this isn't just another manipulation? Another lie?" "Helen, opened the purse she was carrying and took out a worn leather folder. "I kept everything," she said. "Every attempt to contact you, every lawsuit I filed that was blocked, every letter I sent that was returned. I have proof, Sarah. I have our history." She placed the folder on the bed. Sarah stared at it as if it were a snake about to strike. Beatrice, sensing her hesitation, picked up the folder and opened it carefully. Inside was a collection of time-yellowed documents, old photographs, letters in sealed envelopes. Beatrice picked up one of the photographs. It was of a young woman, maybe in her early 20s, holding a baby. The woman was undeniably a younger version of Helen, and the baby, with her almond-shaped brown eyes and a tuft of dark hair, was clearly Sarah. "Is that me?" Sarah whispered, taking the photo with trembling hands. "Your first birthday," Helen said, her voice choked with emotion. "It was a beautiful day. We had a small party, just close family. You ate so much cake your face was covered in chocolate. Your father took hundreds of pictures." Sarah stared at the photo, trying to remember, but there was nothing. Just a void where a memory should be. She looked at the other photos scattered in the folder. Helen and her at the beach. Helen pushing her on a swing. Helen combing her hair. In all of them there was love. The way Helen looked at her, the tenderness in every gesture captured by the camera, was unmistakable. "Why now?" Sarah finally asked. "Why show up now after all these years?" Helen sat down in the chair, looking suddenly exhausted. "Because I saw the news. I saw what happened at the chapel. And I couldn't stay away any longer, not when you were in danger. I spent years convincing myself you were better off without me, that maybe your father was right, that my presence would only cause confusion. But when I saw those images, when I saw you fall, something inside me broke. I realized I had already lost too much time." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling hot tears stream down her face. It was too much. Everything was too much. Discovering that Ethan was a liar and an abuser. Discovering that her mother, whom she thought was dead, was alive and claiming she had been forced away from her. It was as if the entire foundation of her life was being ripped out from under her. "I need time," she said finally. "I need to process all of this. I can't just accept everything right now." Helen nodded, getting up. "I understand, and I'll give you all the time you need, but please," she took a card from her purse and placed it on the bedside table. "If you need me for anything, call me. I won't pressure you, but I won't disappear again either." After Helen left, Beatrice returned to Sarah's side. "That's a lot to process. In one day," she said gently. "How can I know if she's telling the truth?" Sarah asked. "How can I trust anyone after all this?" "You can't. Not right away," Beatrice said. "Trust has to be built, especially when it's been broken so many times. But you can investigate. You can verify the documents she brought. You can talk to lawyers. You can look up records. The truth leaves a trail, Sarah. It always does." Sarah looked out the window at the dark New York night. Somewhere out there, Ethan was probably plotting how to get out of this situation. Somewhere, Julia was dealing with the consequences of exposing the truth. And somewhere, Helen was returning to a home Sarah didn't know, carrying decades of pain and hope. And there, in that hospital room, Sarah touched her belly, feeling the baby move slightly. "I'll protect you," she whispered. "No matter what happens, no matter how many truths I uncover, I will protect you. You won't grow up in lies like I did." Beatrice smiled, gently squeezing her hand. "You're already a brave mother," she said, "and you're not alone. I'll be here, okay? For your entire stay at the hospital. I'll be around." "Why?" Sarah asked. "Why do you care so much? You don't even know me." Beatrice hesitated, then decided to share. "Because 15 years ago, I was in your shoes. I was the woman in the hospital bed, scared, confused, not knowing what to do. And there was a nurse who stayed by my side, who helped me find strength, who showed me there was a way out. She saved my life. And ever since then, I promised I would do the same for other women whenever I could." Sarah felt a wave of gratitude. "Thank you," she said simply. "Rest now," Beatrice said, adjusting the pillow. "Tomorrow we'll think about the next steps, one day at a time." But even after Beatrice dimmed the lights and left the room, Sarah couldn't sleep. Her mind raced, processing, questioning, trying to fit together all the pieces of a puzzle that seemed to grow with every moment. Who could she trust? What was truth and what was a lie? And most importantly, who was she really, if everything she thought she knew about her own life had been built on falsehoods? Outside in the hallway, she could hear muffled voices. She recognized one of them as Ethan's. He was arguing with someone, probably trying to get into the room. The voice that answered was firm, unyielding. It must be security. Sarah curled up in the bed, pulling the thin blanket up to her chin as if it could protect her. The baby moved again, a flutter that was simultaneously comforting and terrifying. In a few months, she would be a mother. She would have to make decisions that would affect not only her life, but that of a helpless child. And she had no idea how she would do that, when she could barely navigate her own shattered reality. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to find some point of calm in the chaos. Tomorrow, she thought. Tomorrow, she would start looking for answers. Tomorrow, she would start rebuilding, piece by piece, the truth of her life. But for now, all she could do was survive the night, breathe through the pain, and trust that the dawn would bring some clarity to the nightmare her life had become. The next morning arrived with a cruel brightness that invaded the hospital room through the half-closed blinds. Sarah had slept in short, fitful bursts, waking repeatedly from fragments of nightmares where she was falling endlessly, where hands pushed her and voices accused her. When she finally gave up on trying to sleep, the clock on the wall showed 6:30 in the morning. Beatrice came in shortly after, carrying a tray with coffee and toast. "Good morning," she said, with that warm smile that seemed to be her trademark. "Brought you a decent breakfast. The hospital food leaves something to be desired, but at least the coffee is strong." Sarah sat up carefully, each movement a reminder of the bruises that marked her body. "Thank you," she said, accepting the cup of coffee. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," Beatrice replied, pulling up the familiar chair. "But I wanted to." She paused, observing Sarah with the same careful attention she had shown from the beginning. "There's something I need to tell you. He tried to get into your room 3 times during the night." Sarah's stomach clenched. "Ethan?" Beatrice nodded. "Security stopped him every time. He claimed spousal rights, said he was worried about you and the baby. But I informed the head of security about the situation, and they're being strict. He won't get near you while you're here. And when I leave—" The question slipped out before Sarah could stop it, laden with all the fear that had kept her awake all night. "When you leave," Beatrice said calmly, "you're going to have a plan, and you're going to have support. I've already spoken with the hospital's social worker, Dr. Carla Evans. She's coming to talk to you this morning about your options. There are safe places you can stay, legal resources you can access." Sarah took a sip of coffee, letting the hot liquid burn her throat, a concrete sensation that anchored her to the present. "I've been thinking," she began slowly, "about what Helen said yesterday. About my father." Beatrice waited in silence, a non-verbal invitation for Sarah to continue. "My father passed away 2 years ago," Sarah continued. "A sudden heart attack. He was only 56. It was so fast I didn't even get to say goodbye properly. And now I'm wondering, if what Helen said is true, then everything my dad told me about my childhood was a lie. He made me grow up believing my mother abandoned me, made me grow up with that wound." "Were you close?" Beatrice asked gently. Sarah thought about it. "We were, I guess. But there was always a distance, you know, like he was always holding something back. I attributed it to the pain of my mother's supposed departure, thought he'd never gotten over it. But now I wonder if it was guilt, if he was living with the weight of what he'd done." "It's possible," Beatrice said. "People do terrible things when they're afraid of losing control. Your father might have genuinely believed he was protecting you, even if his methods were wrong. Or maybe he was. Just a cruel man who wanted to keep me from my mother," Sarah said, feeling bitterness rise in her throat. "Maybe he enjoyed having that control." The door opened again, and a woman in her 50s entered, wearing a navy blue suit and carrying a leather briefcase. Her graying hair was tied in a neat bun, and her thin-framed glasses rested on the tip of her nose. "Good morning, Sarah," she said, extending a hand. I'm Carla Evans, the hospital's social worker. Nurse Davis has brought me up to speed on your situation. May I have a word with you? Beatrice stood up. I'll give you two some privacy. If you need anything, just call Sarah. After Beatrice left, Carla sat down and opened her briefcase. Sarah, she began, I know you're going through an extremely difficult time. My goal here isn't to judge or pressure you, but to offer options and resources that can help you navigate this situation. For the next hour, Carla carefully outlined the available alternatives. There were shelters for women in vulnerable situations, where Sarah could stay temporarily while she got her life in order. There were specialized lawyers who could help her with restraining, orders and other legal matters. There were support groups, therapists and financial resources for those who needed to start from scratch. As Carla spoke, Sarah felt strangely disconnected, as if they were discussing someone else's life. How had her life come to this? Just 24 hours ago, she was preparing to celebrate a decade of the Foundation's success. Now she was discussing shelters and restraining orders. I have money, Sarah said suddenly, interrupting Carla mid-explanation about assistance programs. My father left me a substantial inheritance. I don't need a temporary shelter. I can afford a hotel, an apartment. Carla nodded. That's good. It gives you more options. But I would still recommend considering places where your location can be kept confidential, at least initially, and I definitely suggest seeking legal counsel as soon as possible. About that, Sarah said, there was a woman at the chapel yesterday, Julia Miller. She brought documents, made accusations about my husband and the Foundation. Would you know how I could get in touch with her? Carla made a note. I can check. If she was at the scene and gave a statement to the police, there should be a record. She paused. Sarah, I have to ask, do you intend to press formal charges for the assault? The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Pressing charges would mean making it all official, public. It would mean a trial, a court, exposure. But not pressing charges would mean letting Ethan get away with it, would mean sending the message that what he did was acceptable. I don't know, Sarah admitted. I need to think. That's understandable, Carla said. But the sooner you make that decision, the better. Evidence can be lost, witnesses can forget details. And there's the fact that the assault happened in public with multiple witnesses. That significantly strengthens a potential case. After Carla left, Sarah was alone again with her thoughts. She picked up the card Helen had left on the bedside table, turning it over in her fingers. A cell phone number written in blue ink just below the name Helen Johnson. It would be so easy to just throw the card away, to ignore the woman claiming to be her mother, to continue living in the version of reality she had always known. But something stopped her. Picking up the phone that was charging beside the bed, Sarah dialed the number before she could change her mind. It rang 3 times before Helen answered, her voice filled with cautious hope. Hello? Helen, Sarah said, her own voice sounding strange to her ears, hesitant and vulnerable. It's Sarah. I'd like to talk. Could you come to the hospital? There was a silence on the other end, then a choked sob. I'll be there in 20 minutes, Helen said. While she waited, Sarah leafed through the folder Helen had left. There were so many documents, so many pieces of a life she didn't know, letters addressed to her that were never delivered, written in Helen's neat cursive. Sarah opened one at random, dated 10 years ago. My dearest Sarah, the letter read. Today you turned 15. I wonder what you're like, if you inherited my love for music, if you still have that smile that could light up any room. I tried to find you today. I stood outside your school, just hoping to catch a glimpse of you. But your father saw me and threatened to call the police. He said I was violating the restraining order, that if I didn't leave, he'd have me arrested. So I left, like I always do. But I want you to know, wherever you are, that I have never stopped loving you, not for a single day. Sarah's tears fell onto the paper, slightly smudging the old ink. How had she not known? How had her father kept this secret for so long? And more importantly, how many other lies were there in her life? Helen arrived exactly 20 minutes later, slightly out of breath as if she had run. She stopped at the doorway, uncertain, waiting for permission to enter. Sarah nodded and Helen came in, closing the door softly behind her. "Thank you for giving me this chance," Helen said, sitting in the chair beside the bed. "I know this isn't easy." "I read some of your letters," Sarah said, gesturing to the folder. She paused. "Why did you never go to the courts? Why did you just give up?" Helen sighed, a sound heavy with years of pain. "I didn't give up, Sarah. I fought. For years I fought. But your father was a lawyer. He had connections, resources. He buried me in lawsuits, in legal fees I couldn't afford. And when I realized that every attempt only resulted in more restrictions, more threats, I decided to change tactics. I decided to wait. Wait until you were an adult, until you could make your own decisions about whether or not you wanted to know me." "And when I turned 18? Sarah asked. "Why didn't you show up then?" Helen looked down at her hands. "I tried. I went to your college. I looked for you. But when I saw you, you were so happy, so wrapped up in your new life, your friends. And I thought, who am I to show up now and destroy the world you've built? What right did I have to drop that bomb on your life? So I went home and waited a little longer, always waiting for the right moment, the right sign." Sarah felt anger bubble up. "So you saw what happened yesterday and thought that was the right moment, when I was at my absolute worst?" Helen leaned forward, her eyes shining with tears. "No, Sarah. I saw that you were in danger and I couldn't stay away anymore. It didn't matter if you would hate me for showing up. It didn't matter if you would send me away. I needed to make sure you were okay, that you had someone, anyone, on your side." Helen's words rang with sincerity, but Sarah still battled the distrust that years of disappointment had planted. "How can I believe you?" she asked. "How can I believe anyone after all this?" "You can't," Helen said simply. "Not right now, but I can prove it with time. I can be here consistently, let my actions speak, and if in the end you decide you don't want me in your life, I will respect that. But at least you will have made that choice consciously, not because someone else made it for you." There was a logic to that which resonated with Sarah. Her entire life had been shaped by decisions others had made for her. Her father deciding to push Helen away, Ethan deciding to manipulate, lie, control. Maybe it was time for her to start making her own decisions, even if they were terrifying. "Tell me about you," Sarah requested. "About who you are, what you do. I don't know anything about you." Helen smiled for the first time, a small but genuine smile. "I'm a literature teacher at a public high school in Jersey City. I live in a small apartment near the waterfront. I have 2 cats, Hemingway and Fitzgerald, named after my favorite writers." She chuckled softly. "I know. Very cliché for a literature teacher. In my spare time, I volunteer teaching adult literacy classes. It's a simple life, but it's mine." The picture Helen painted was so different from the life Sarah knew, the luxury of the Upper East Side, the social events, the designer clothes. But there was something comforting in that simplicity, something authentic. "Did I inherit your love for literature?" Sarah asked. "You mentioned it in one of the letters." Helen looked at her, surprised. "You like to read?" Sarah nodded. "I always have. It was my escape when I was a kid. My dad never really got it. He thought it was impractical. But I would lose myself in books, in stories of faraway places and different people." "You got that from me," Helen said, her voice thick with emotion. "When you were little, I read to you every night. You had a favorite book about a girl who traveled to a magical kingdom. You made me read that story over and over. You never got tired of it." Sarah felt something stir inside her, not a memory exactly, but a distant feeling, like the echo of something familiar. "I have a book like that," she said slowly, "on my bookshelf, in the apartment. It's old. The pages are yellowed. My dad said it belonged to my grandmother." "It was mine," Helen said. "I gave it to you when you turned 3. There's a dedication on the first page. To my little Sarah, who travels to magical worlds every night. With eternal love, Mom." Sarah closed her eyes, trying to remember if there was a dedication in that book. But she had never checked, always assuming her father's story about her grandmother was true. Another layer of lies, another piece of her life that wasn't what it seemed. "Helen," Sarah said, opening her eyes. I need help. I need to know what to do, where to go. Everything is falling apart and I don't know how to rebuild. Helen took her hand, and Sarah didn't pull away. Then we'll rebuild together, she said. One step at a time. First, we'll get you out of here and somewhere safe. Then we'll deal with the legal issues, with the revelations about Ethan and the Foundation, and we'll do it your way in your own time. Would you let me stay with you? Sarah asked, surprising herself with the question. At least for a little while, until I figure things out. Helen squeezed her hand. Sarah, you can stay with me for as long as you need. My home is small, but it's always had a space waiting for you. Just then, the door burst open, and Ethan strode in, pushing past a security guard who was trying to stop him. His face was flushed, his eyes bloodshot, as if he hadn't slept. He stopped short when he saw Sarah and Helen together, their hands intertwined. What's going on here? He demanded. Who is this woman, Sarah? Sarah felt the initial fear give way to something different, something closer to determination. This is Helen, she said, keeping her voice steady. My mother. Ethan laughed, a humorless sound. Your mother. Sarah, your mother is dead. You know that. This woman is clearly taking advantage of you in a vulnerable moment. More security guards arrived along with Beatrice. Sir, you need to leave, one of them said. You're not authorized to be here. I'm her husband, Ethan protested. I have every right to be here. Actually, you don't, a new voice said from the doorway. Everyone turned to see a man in a dark suit, a leather briefcase under his arm. My name is Detective Robert Miller. I'm investigating the incident yesterday at the chapel of Our Lady of Grace, and Mr. Hayes, I need you to come with me to give a statement. Ethan paled. A statement? About what? It was an accident everyone saw. My wife tripped and fell. Funny, the detective said, pulling a tablet from his briefcase, because I have 12 different videos right here, filmed by guests at the ceremony that show a very different story. He turned the tablet, and even from a distance Sarah could see the frozen image on the screen. It was Ethan, his arm raised, frozen in the moment before the blow. Ethan looked around like a cornered animal. That's taken out of context, he began. You don't understand the full situation. Then help me understand, the detective said, at the precinct. Voluntarily, or do we need to make this official? For a long moment, Ethan just stood there, his gaze shifting. From Sarah to Helen to the detective, and then in a final desperate move he turned to Sarah. Please, he said, and for the first time his voice sounded truly broken. Sarah, you know who I am. You know me. This was a moment of weakness, of stress. I never meant to hurt you. Please don't let them destroy everything we've built. Sarah looked at the man who had been her husband, the father of her unborn child, and she saw, perhaps for the first time with clarity, not the rehearsed charm or the carefully constructed facade, but the naked truth behind them. She saw a man desperate for control, for power, for maintaining his pristine image no matter the cost, and she knew that whatever answer she gave now would shape not only her own future, but the future of the child she carried. I don't know you, Ethan, she said calmly. I thought I did, but I was wrong. And yes, I'm going to let the truth, whatever it is, come out, because that's what should have happened from the very beginning. Ethan opened his mouth, closed it, then finally turned and followed the detective out of the room. The security guards escorted them, leaving Sarah, Helen, and Beatrice in a heavy silence. Beatrice was the first to speak. You were so brave, she said. Sarah didn't feel brave. She felt exhausted, scared, uncertain, but she also felt, for the first time in a long time, that she had made a decision that was truly her own, and maybe that, in itself, was a start. 3 weeks had passed since that day in the hospital, and Sarah was still adjusting to her new reality. Helen's apartment in Jersey City was exactly as she had described, small but cozy, with walls lined with bookshelves and windows that looked out toward the water. The view was different from the one on the Upper East Side, more understated and peaceful, but Sarah found she preferred it that way. There was less pretense, less pressure to keep up appearances. There was simply room to breathe. The day settled into a comforting routine. Helen would leave for her teaching job in the morning, leaving fresh coffee and affectionate notes on the fridge. Sarah would spend her mornings resting as the doctors had recommended, reading books from Helen's shelves or just sitting on the balcony listening to the sounds of the city. In the afternoons they would meet for lunch, talking about books, about Helen's students, about small things that didn't carry the weight of recent trauma. But there were issues that couldn't be avoided indefinitely. One Thursday afternoon, Sarah had a visit from Julia Miller, the woman who had set the whole revelation in motion at the chapel. Helen made tea and then discreetly retreated to her room, giving them privacy. Julia looked different from the last time Sarah had seen her. The elegant green dress had been replaced by jeans and a simple blouse, her hair loose around her shoulders, but her eyes held that same determination. "I wanted to apologize," Julia began, holding the teacup in her hands. "I know the way I exposed everything wasn't ideal. I could have chosen a more private moment, a less public place. But I had to be sure Ethan couldn't just make the evidence disappear, like he did with me years ago." Sarah shook her head. "Don't apologize. If you hadn't done what you did, I'd still be living a lie. I'd still be married to a man I didn't really know." Julia smiled sadly. "I imagine these last few weeks haven't been easy." "They haven't," Sarah admitted. "But they've also been clarifying. I've been talking a lot with Helen, learning about my own history, and I've been working with lawyers to understand my legal situation." "About that," Julia said, leaning forward, "the investigation into Ethan and the Foundation is moving forward. The DA's office has found evidence of embezzlement, money laundering, fraudulent documents. It's vast, Sarah, much worse than I imagined when I started digging." Sarah's stomach turned. "How much money are we talking about?" Julia hesitated. "Millions. Over the years, Ethan siphoned off millions of dollars that should have gone to social programs. He used the foundation as a front for illicit business deals, to launder money for corrupt businessmen. The people who trusted him, who donated thinking they were helping underserved communities, were all deceived." Sarah felt nauseous. "And I knew nothing. I was married to him, lived in the same house, and I didn't know." "You couldn't have known," Julia said gently. "Ethan was meticulous, controlling. He kept every aspect of his life in separate compartments. You never had real access to the Foundation's finances, did you?" Sarah thought. "About it. Ethan had always been in charge of everything related to the Foundation and their personal finances. He said he was protecting her, that she didn't need to worry about those things, another form of control she hadn't recognized at the time." "What's going to happen to him?" Sarah asked. Julia took a sip of tea before answering. "If convicted on all charges, he's looking at decades behind bars. Fraud, embezzlement of public and private funds, forgery, assault. The list is long." "And the victims? The people who donated?" "There's an effort to recover what's possible from Ethan's assets. Real estate, bank accounts, investments, but it won't be enough to repay everyone. Many people lost significant amounts." Guilt weighed on Sarah's chest, even knowing she was a victim herself. "I'm so sorry," she said. "For all those people, they trusted, and Ethan betrayed that trust in the worst possible way." "It's not your fault," Julia said firmly. "You didn't know. And now you're doing the right thing by cooperating with the investigation, by not protecting him." They talked for another hour, Julia explaining the next legal steps, what Sarah could expect in terms of proceedings and hearings. When Julia finally stood to leave, she took Sarah's hand. "You're going to come out of this stronger," she said. "I know it seems impossible right now, but you will." After Julia left, Helen emerged from her room. Sarah was on the balcony, looking out at the water, one hand resting on her ever-growing belly. "Are you okay?" Helen asked, joining her. "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "Should I be? I found out my husband is a criminal, that my father lied to me my whole life, that the mother I thought was dead is alive. My entire life was built on lies. How am I supposed to raise a child when I don't even know who I am anymore?" Helen was silent for a moment, then said, "You know who you are, Sarah. You're the woman who chose truth over a comfortable lie. You're the woman who found the courage to walk away from a dangerous man. You're the woman who is building a new life even though you're scared. That's who you are." Helen's words touched something deep inside Sarah, and she felt tears roll down her face. "How can you have so much faith in me? You barely know." "Barely. Me." "I do know you," Helen said softly. "I carried you inside me. I saw you take your first steps. I heard your first words. And even after all these years apart, I see the girl you were in, the woman you've become. You have a strength inside you, Sarah. You always have." That night, Sarah had trouble sleeping. The conversation with Julia had stirred up too many emotions, brought to the surface questions she had been trying to avoid. On an impulse, she got up and went to the living room, where Helen's bookshelves lined nearly every wall. She began to browse the books, looking for something specific. She found it on the third shelf, a worn children's book, the cover illustrating a girl walking through a magical door. The pages were yellowed, some corners dog-eared. And there, on the first page, was the dedication Helen had mentioned. "To my little Sarah, who travels to magical worlds every night. With eternal love, Mom." The handwriting was the same as in the letters Helen had saved for years. It was the physical, tangible proof that Helen was telling the truth, that she had really been a part of Sarah's life. Once, Sarah clutched the book to her chest and let the tears fall freely, mourning all the lost years, all the stories that weren't told together, all the nights she could have had a mother reading to her. But she also felt something else, something like hope, because there was still time. There were still stories to share, memories to create, and in a few months there would be a new child to read to, a child who would grow up knowing the truth, surrounded by genuine love. The days turned into weeks, and Sarah gradually began to rebuild her life. With the help of a lawyer Julia recommended, she filed for divorce. She learned she was entitled to a portion of the assets acquired during the marriage, but also discovered that many of those assets were being seized as part of the criminal investigation against Ethan. She decided not to fight for anything beyond what was strictly necessary. She wanted a clean start, with nothing tainted by his actions. The inheritance her father had left remained untouched in an account Ethan never knew existed. It was a bitter irony, Sarah thought, that the money from the man who had separated her from Helen would now be what allowed them to build a life together. With that money, Sarah started making plans. She would contribute to Helen's expenses, of course, but she also wanted to invest in something meaningful. After much thought, she decided to establish a fund for the victims of fraud related to the New Hope Foundation. It wouldn't be enough to repay everyone, but it would be a start, a way to try to repair some of the damage Ethan had caused. One Saturday morning, 4 weeks after leaving the hospital, Sarah woke up with a different sensation. Not exactly pain, but a pressure, a new discomfort. She called for Helen, who immediately recognized the signs. "They're just practice contractions," she explained, "but let's go to the doctor just to be sure. You're still a few weeks from your due date, but it's better to check." At the office of Dr. Amelia Costa, the obstetrician who had taken over Sarah's prenatal care, they were reassured. They were just Braxton Hicks contractions, the body preparing for a labor that was still weeks away. But during the routine ultrasound, something wonderful happened. The baby moved in such a way that they could see his face clearly on the screen for the first time. "Look at that," Dr. Costa said, smiling. "Your baby is saying hello." Sarah stared at the screen, seeing the perfectly formed little face, the pursed lips, the tiny hands near his face. And she felt, for the first time since discovering her pregnancy, a pure, uncomplicated joy. This was her son, hers and no one else's. A new life, untainted by the lies and betrayals of the past. Helen held her hand, and Sarah saw tears streaming down her mother's face. "My grandson," Helen whispered. "He's perfect." Back at the apartment, Sarah and Helen sat on the balcony with tea and homemade cookies. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I've been thinking about names," Sarah said. "For the baby," Helen smiled. "And? I want a name that means a new beginning, something that represents hope, a new future." Helen thought for a moment. How about Theo? It comes from the Greek, meaning gift of God, a divine present. Sarah tested the name, letting it roll off her tongue. Theo Johnson. She smiled. I like it. It's perfect. That night, Sarah wrote the first entry in a journal she planned to give Theo when he was older. She wrote about the past few months, about the painful truths discovered, about the mother she had found again, about the strength she never knew she had. And she wrote about her promises to him, about the kind of mother she would strive to be, about the honest and loving world she would try to build around him. 2 weeks later, Sarah received a call from Detective Miller. Ethan had accepted a plea bargain with the prosecutors, confessing to his actions in exchange for a reduced sentence. Still, he would spend many years in prison. The call should have brought satisfaction, but Sarah felt only a distant sadness. Not for Ethan, but for the person he could have been if he had chosen honesty over greed and control. She was also informed that she would need to testify in a few hearings related to the case, but only as a character witness, since she had not been involved in or aware of Ethan's criminal activities. The thought of seeing him again made her nervous, but Helen promised to be by her side at every hearing. I won't let you face this alone, Helen said. Not ever again. At the first hearing a few weeks later, Sarah walked into the courtroom with Helen on one side and her lawyer on the other. She saw Ethan for the first time since that day in the hospital. He was thinner, with deep dark circles under his eyes, wearing the suit he had worn to hundreds of foundation events. But all the charm was gone, leaving only a tired, defeated man. When their eyes met briefly, Sarah felt no anger or hatred. She felt pity and a kind of closure. This chapter of her life was ending and she was ready to move on. Her testimony was brief and direct. She confirmed that she had no knowledge of the illegal activities, that her finances were completely separate from the foundations, that she herself was a victim of Ethan's lies. When asked about the assault, she recounted the facts calmly, without dramatization, letting the truth speak for itself. After the hearing, outside the courthouse, Julia was waiting. With her was a group of about 20 people holding signs. Who are they? Sarah asked. Volunteers, Julia explained. People who genuinely worked at the foundation on real projects that helped communities. When the truth came out, they were devastated. But they want you to know they don't blame you, and they want to continue the work the right way this time. A woman approached, a kind-faced older woman with grey hair. My name is Rose, she said. I coordinated the Foundation's literacy program. The projects we did were real. They helped real people. And we don't want all of that to be lost because of one man's actions. Sarah felt a wave of emotion. What do you want to do? We were wondering, Rose continued, if you would consider helping us establish a new organization, something completely transparent, with strict auditing, with real accountability, something that truly honors the original purpose of the Foundation before Ethan corrupted it. The idea was both terrifying and exciting. Sarah looked at Helen, who nodded encouragingly. I don't know if I'm the right person, Sarah said. I don't have experience managing non-profits. But you have something more important, Rose said. You have integrity, and you understand better than anyone why transparency and honesty are crucial. Sarah thought about it. Maybe this was a way to turn something terrible into something good, a way to honor the betrayed trust of so many people. I'll think about it, she said finally, and if I decide to get involved, it will be with total transparency. Everything out in the open, all records public, regular audits. Rose smiled broadly. That's exactly what we want. In the following days, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the conversation. She discussed it with Helen, with Julia, with her lawyer. And gradually, a vision began to form. It wouldn't be a traditional foundation, but something more collaborative, more open, a collective where the communities themselves would have an active voice in how resources were used, where every dollar would be traceable, where mistakes would be admitted and corrected publicly. It would be hard work, challenging, possibly even frustrating, but it would be honest. It would be real. 2 weeks before her due date, Sarah, Helen, and Rose gathered on the balcony of the Jersey City apartment to formalize their plans. They spent hours discussing structure, governance, and transparency mechanisms. As the sun began to set, they had a solid outline. "We need a name," Rose said. "The Renewal Project," Sarah suggested, "because that's what we all deserve, a chance to start over, to build something true." Helen and Rose exchanged glances, then smiled. "Perfect," Helen said. That night, after Rose had left, Sarah and Helen remained on the balcony, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. "Mom," Sarah said, testing the word that still felt new on her tongue, "thank you for everything, for not giving up, for being here, for helping me find my way." Helen took her hand. "You found your own way, sweetheart. I just had the privilege of being here to witness it." 3 days. Later, at 4 in the morning, Sarah woke with a familiar sensation, but much more intense than the practice contractions. Helen drove her to the hospital, and at 8:47 on that sunny morning, Theo Johnson came into the world, weighing 7 pounds with a tuft of dark hair and lungs that made his opinion of the cold, bright world he'd been thrust into perfectly clear. When the nurse, who by coincidence was Beatrice again on a morning shift, placed Theo in Sarah's arms for the first time, everything else faded away. The past weeks of pain and discovery, the years of lies, the betrayals and disappointments, it all receded, leaving only this moment. Mother and son, skin to skin, heart to heart. "It's you," Sarah whispered to the baby. "You're the one I've been waiting for." Helen, with tears streaming freely down her face, gently touched Theo's head. "Welcome to the world, little one. You are so loved." Beatrice, observing the scene with her characteristic smile, said, "You make a beautiful family." And Sarah realized it was true. Despite everything, despite all the unconventional ways and winding paths that had brought them here, they were a family, rebuilt, reconfigured, but real and true in ways her old life had never been. In the days that followed, settled at home with Theo, Sarah and Helen established their routine. It was exhausting, as caring for a newborn always is, but it was also filled with moments of pure joy. Theo nursing peacefully as the sun streamed through the window, Helen singing old lullabies while rocking her grandson to sleep, the baby's first smile, which appeared earlier than the book said it should. Julia visited, bringing practical and impractical gifts, and was thrilled to hold Theo. Rose stopped by with a blanket she had knitted, herself. Even Dr. Costa made a house call, more as a friend than a doctor. A month after Theo's birth, Sarah received the final divorce papers. She signed them without hesitation, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. That chapter was officially closed. Ethan was now just her son's biological father, nothing more, and she would have to navigate that complicated reality eventually, but not now. Now was a time to simply be, to heal, to grow alongside her son. In Theo's second month, Sarah formally established the Renewal Project. The first public meeting drew more than 50 people, including former donors to Ethan's corrupt foundation, volunteers wanting to help, and members of communities in need of support. Sarah, with Theo sleeping in a sling against her chest, presented the project's vision and structure. "It won't be easy," she said honestly. "There will be challenges, there will be setbacks, but every step will be taken with transparency. Every decision will be made with community input, because the trust that was broken needs to be rebuilt, and that can only be done through consistent, honest action." The response was overwhelmingly positive. People volunteered for different committees. Local businesses offered support. An accountant came forward to ensure all finances were impeccably maintained and made publicly available. As Sarah watched the energy and enthusiasm in the room, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose, hope, the sense that, despite everything, something good could emerge from the ashes. Months passed and life gradually found a new rhythm. Theo grew, hitting milestones with the comforting regularity of a healthy baby. Sarah and Helen developed a partnership as mother and daughter that was both new and strangely familiar. They learned each other's quirks, learned when to give space and when to draw close, learned how to be a family after so much time apart. The Renewal Project flourished. It started small, with literacy programs in a nearby community, but it grew organically and sustainably. The radical transparency Sarah had insisted on, became not just a defining feature, but an inspiration for other organizations. And Ethan, serving his sentence, became an increasingly distant figure from the past. Sarah thought of him occasionally, usually with a mix of pity and relief. Pity for the man who had wasted so much potential on lies and greed, relief that she had escaped before more damage was done. One Saturday night, when Theo was almost a year old, Sarah was on the balcony with Helen. The baby was asleep in his room, and they were enjoying the rare silence. "You know," Sarah said, "a year ago, my life was completely different. I thought I knew who I was, where I was going, and then it all fell apart. And now?" Helen asked gently. Sarah thought about it. "Now I know that I don't know everything, that life can change in an instant, but I also know that I can survive those changes. I can adapt, grow, rebuild." She looked at Helen. "And I know I'm not alone. That might be the biggest change of all." Helen smiled, putting an arm around Sarah's shoulders. "You were never alone, honey. Even when we couldn't be together physically, you were always in my heart. And now," she glanced toward the room where Theo slept, "now we have a new generation to love and protect, to teach about truth, honesty, and courage." Sarah nodded, feeling tears of gratitude in her eyes. "We'll do it differently with him. We'll make sure he grows up knowing the truth even when it's hard. We'll teach him that family is about love and presence, not blood or obligation. And we'll be here," Helen added, "together, for all of it, the easy times and the hard ones." They sat in silence for a while, watching the city lights reflect on the dark water. And Sarah felt, perhaps for the first time in her life, a deep and genuine peace. Not because everything was perfect, because it wasn't. There were still challenges ahead, unresolved issues, scars that would take time to fully heal. But she had a mother who loved her, a son who depended on her, a purpose that drove her. She had the truth, however painful, and she had hope, bright and persistent as the stars beginning to appear in the night sky. The journey had been brutal and devastating. The revelations had shaken the very foundations of who she thought she was. But on the other side of that storm, Sarah had found something precious, something she hadn't known was missing. She had found herself, not the version others had molded, but the real, imperfect, courageous person she was capable of being. And that, Sarah realized, wasn't the end of a story. It was just the beginning.